Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeform, a world that just might work. And I'm going to be speaking today with ALEC MacGILLIS about his newest book, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America. And you can learn more by following him on Twitter at ALEC MacGILLIS, A-L-E-C, MacGILLIS. So it's at ALEC, MacGillis. The show airs as specials on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA and streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn. Podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. I started reading Fulfillment, and I thought of Fast Food Nation. Now, I don't often do this, compare one book to another, but it's a high compliment to both of them. They both take on something that we take for granted, something that has found a place in nearly all of our daily lives. In this case, it's online commerce and immediate delivery as personified by Amazon, and in the former, it was obviously fast food. And they don't just look closely at them, which they both do, but they bring to life their ripple effects, the consequences that such revolutions have on so many aspects of society, both up and downstream, and they connect the dots. I've long said that humanity will die by convenience. Convenience is an unchallenged driver of much of what ails us. MacGillis is telling stories here of the prices we are paying. As a value, I'd wager convenience ranks very high in our actual day-to-day decision-making in all sorts of ways, so accepted that we don't even notice it's a choice. And as a value, convenience is not about survival. We could survive with much less convenience, but we may not survive the amount of convenience we have. Here's some Amazon numbers. More than 100 million people in the U.S. subscribe to its Amazon Prime service. Amazon reaps fully half of what people in this country spend online. It's the second biggest private workplace in the U.S. after Walmart. And digging a little deeper, among Amazon's large Arizona-based workforce, most of it inside its warehouses, 1 in 3 people was on federal supplement nutrition assistance in 2017. Huge as it already was, Amazon expanded enormously during the pandemic as online shopping became, quote, essential. It added 425,000 workers to bring it to 800,000 in the U.S. and 1.2 million worldwide, not counting drivers. It added 50% warehouse space. This is just during the pandemic. The stock price rose 80%, and the personal fortune of Jeff Bezos increased by $58 billion. By the way, I checked. I made 6 purchases from Amazon in 2020, which I know, according to my friends, I'm a real outlier. ALEC MacGillis is a senior reporter for ProPublica and the recipient of the George Polk Award and the Robin Toner Prize. He worked previously at the Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, the New Republic. His journalism has appeared in all the top publications. He's the author of The Cynic, a 2014 biography of Mitch McConnell, and his latest, the one we're talking about today, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America. Welcome, ALEC MacGillis, to Freeform, a world that just might work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
And let me tell listeners we're recording this conversation Tuesday, June 8th. So my first question, how are you? How did you cope with the pandemic? Or how are you still coping with it? It's tough to know where we are right now.
I'm all right, thanks. It was a very tough year for me, but not so much related to the pandemic. I actually lost my father, who I was very close with, also a journalist who had a terrible hiking accident last fall in Maine, and so my family's been dealing with that, which has been very, very difficult. But as far as the pandemic went, we've managed to avoid the worst, and I've actually been definitely taking the approach with my family and my kids of being fairly all along actually of being fairly encouraging them to still get out of the house as much as possible and to try to retain some kind of normalcy. I spent a lot of last summer taking my older son to baseball tournaments across the Mid-Atlantic, and it was very good to be able to still get out to at least do that. And so thankfully they've managed to their mental health has managed to come through this okay, which I think is partly due to our having definitely taken stock of the evidence on young people and the outdoors, and encourage them to keep going outdoors and staying active.
Very good. And my condolence to you on the passing of your father.
Thank you.
I like listeners to get a feel for the people, as we just did from you. But if we can take it a bit more, how do you see your path to the work you do today? And I invite you to go back to, some childhood inspiration, mentor, turning point, those sort of things.
Sure. This book actually does go back quite a ways. I would say it goes back all the way to my upbringing in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where I actually am right now. Small city in Western Mass where I grew up, where my father was the editor of the paper, and it was a city that was very middle class, prosperous, stable city of about 60,000. The prosperity was heavily dependent on General Electric, which had a lot of different operations here, and General GE kind of moved out as I was growing up. And the city fell on incredibly hard times, lost about a third of its population, and I just saw the city fall way behind the Metro Boston area in the eastern part of the state, 2.5 hours away. We used to be much closer to Boston in terms of our basic prosperity, and then you saw that gap just grow so wide to the point where they're just light years apart now, the two parts of the state. And I was very bothered watching that gap grow as I was growing up. And then I saw it growing ever wider in other parts of the country. I saw, as a reporter, I worked my way up the ladder, working a lot of small papers in New England, and then made my way to the Baltimore Sun and finally the Washington Post, and going around the country as a national political reporter for the Post in the early Obama years, covering the Obama campaign in 2008, and then the Great Recession in those years, seeing the incredible divide between these towns and cities I would go to in the Midwest or Appalachia or elsewhere that were just really struggling, and then coming back to Metro Washington and seeing this incredible prosperity on display there. Metro DC had, if anything, just gotten wealthier during the Great Recession, and seeing that incredible divide, and also just the sense of disconnect, of complacency in DC as regarded what was happening elsewhere around the country, really bothered me. And it bothered me even more when I moved back to Baltimore with my family in 2013 and saw just the gap between those two cities, DC and Baltimore, growing ever wider, two cities just 40 miles apart that now truly are just so far removed from each other that I almost experience a sense of vertigo when I go from one to the other. The difference in atmospheric pressure is so great. And so I wanted to write about those gaps, these growing divides between places in America that I thought were just becoming a huge problem for our country, this regional inequality. And then finally, after Trump's election in 2016, I thought I really need to take this on in a big way and do a book on it, because it's clearly having a real effect on our politics, these regional disparities. And then after about a year of thinking about different ways to come at this issue, I decided to come at it through the frame of Amazon, to kind of use Amazon as a lens onto the country and to tell the story of these inequalities. And I chose it for two reasons. One was that the company is simply so ubiquitous in our life now, in our country, that it's just a handy thread to kind of take you around the country and show you what we're becoming as a society, to kind of use it in that kind of metaphoric sense and as a symptom of what we're becoming. But then also, more importantly, it serves as a good frame onto this problem, because it itself is contributing to the problem.
I find that very fascinating, and it was sort of the sense I had that the itch you were scratching was not Amazon, but
right.
this amazing contrast. And as you point out, I think a lot of people have noticed it and talk about it as urban versus rural. And they sort of look at, blue and red as urban versus rural, maybe even within states and so on. But you point out it's not that simple, that like a city like Baltimore now compare to a city like Washington, that it's specific cities. We talk about the 1%, the 99% inequality among individuals, but the inequality among cities is something that really drives a lot of this book.
Exactly. It was really, and you're right. This was the core thing that initially motivated me to write this, and it's not just about urban and rural. That's certainly a part of it, and I have one whole chapter in the book really kind of devoted to rural isolation and rural decline. But it's also about the gaps between cities, and it does bother me when this is talked about only as an urban-rural issue, when in fact we have all these other cities that are being left behind, just as the rural areas are.
Yeah, I'm going to read a little bit of some of the statistics that flesh out what you've just been talking about, taken from your book. Through the final decades of the 19th century, for the first 8 decades of the 20th, as the country grew into the richest and most powerful on earth, poorer parts were catching up actually with richer ones. But starting in 80, this reversed. In 1980, virtually every area of the country had mean incomes that were within 20% of the national average. By 2013, virtually the entire Northeast corridor, Boston to Washington, and Northern California coast had incomes more than 20% above average. Most startlingly, a swath of the country's interior had incomes more than 20% below average. And as you point out, not just the rural South and Southwest, but much of the Midwest and the Great Plains and those areas that turned out for Trump and basically won the Electoral College for him in 2016. Income in the Washington area was a quarter higher than in the rest of the country in 1980, a quarter higher. By the middle of 2015, it was more than twice as large. I just don't know if people have seen that as starkly as you did. Let me ask you, before we proceed more into fulfillment, just briefly about ProPublica. It's where you do a lot of your writing now. And there may be some people who don't know of it, but how has it become what it is, and how does it serve you as a journalist?
ProPublica is a very, very interesting organization, and really is, in a way, is at the forefront of kind of what journalism is now becoming as the business model for our industry. So struggles in this new environment. Essentially, I'll just give the origin story. ProPublica was founded in 2008 or 9 with $10 million donation from Herbert and Marion Sandler, a couple of philanthropists who had sold their subprime lending company, Golden West, shortly before the housing crash. I think I have the dates right, and big liberal donors, progressive donors who also support NPR and all sorts of other causes, and they thought it was that they saw what was happening with local media around the country, and decided to help found this new organization that would be devoted to essentially to doing the kind of deep digging that a lot of news organizations no longer had the resources to do. And it started small, but has now grown quite large to the point where we have, I would say maybe 40 or 50 reporters on staff, journalists on staff, sort of depending on how you're counting. And it's nonprofit, supported by large foundations and many small donors who also see what value that this reporting is bringing. And the way it works is that we do these big reporting projects and very often share our work with other outlets to help get the stuff out there. So we share our articles with newspapers or magazines, or sometimes TV or radio, and those organizations get our stories for free. And so it's a great deal for them. And it's also a good deal for us because it just helps us to get our work out there. All we have to showcase our work with is our website.
Mm-hmm.
But it helps to get our things out there in other forms. And my pieces tend to run as magazine articles, and sometimes they run only on the website, but very often they run in magazines like the New Yorker or the Times Magazine or the Atlantic. And it's, for me, it's just an incredibly fortunate, really kind of dream arrangement where I get to be, writing for different articles, for different magazines, reaching different audiences, but with the stability of a staff position, and I'm just enormously grateful for it. More recently, ProPublica has started, in recognition of the fact of just how devastated the local press has been around the country. It has started to branch out, to do more, to kind of fill those voids. It has started, for a couple of years now, it has been essentially sort of sponsoring reporters at local newspapers who get support from ProPublica. The newspaper gets support from ProPublica so that one reporter can do more deep digging in a given year and not be so beholden to the daily beat, and it's essentially kind of a one-year fellowship supported by ProPublica for a reporter at a local paper. They're also we've now started hiring more people around the country who are ProPublica full-time staffers but are based out around the country, so that we are now more dispersed around the country than we used to be. We're based in New York still, but we now have more people around the country. I work out of Baltimore, and it's very useful for me to be able to do my work from somewhere that is not DC or New York, and even that little bit of distance from DC helps give me a lot of perspective. So it's just been, for me, it's been 6 years now there, and it's been just incredibly fortunate arrangement where I'm able to spend quite a lot of time on pieces, do a lot of digging, and then get my pieces out in these different outlets.
Well, I'll tell you, Alec, I'm really glad I asked, because I didn't know all of that. And I notice, as you point out, I will see something that is ProPublica and PBS, or ProPublica and the Atlantic, or something, it seems to me. And I never knew quite how that works, but the model makes sense. And the business model is all nonprofit funding.
Yes, it's all donors.
And
yes.
Obviously, if they've been able to add this program of bolstering local journalism, somebody's doing a good job at home in terms of raising those funds.
They are. We have a crack development team, and there are now more and more both organizations and foundations and then regular folks who are so worried about what's happening in journalism that they are now more and more willing to support it philanthropically.
Very good. I'm going to ask sort of a big, what I consider sort of a big philosophical question that I raised in the introduction, because I know otherwise we'll deal with all the details and I'll never get to it. And that is what I said about convenience, that it's my sense that, and I've sort of flippantly been saying for many years, our society, our civilization will die by convenience. And so let me ask, and I'm going to flesh this out just a little bit. Are we greedy about convenience? It's always been a value that the wealthy pursued, to have a little this close by and to have people in their service and so on. But is it a way now that even those who have little power in society can, at least in this realm, cheat what used to be the rules of time and place? They can demand speed of delivery that might have seemed beyond their budget before. And often enough, they can win maybe on cost as well, and certainly in a place like Amazon on choice. But have we, and I could use convenience very broadly, it's that it's more accessible. I have to do less to get what I want. And of course, in this thing of online purchasing and immediate delivery, where I used to have to go to the store, make a choice, bring it home, now I sit at my desk, I order it, it shows up, and now it shows up almost as quickly as if I went to the store and got it. have we bought more convenience than we can afford?
Yes, I would say the short answer is yes. The book is in a way an attempt to show you everything that lies behind that one-click convenience, to show you what the actual true cost is, and to give you the full accounting of what it's doing to our country. I would just say quickly on this, one very important thing to keep in mind when you make those decisions as a consumer about that convenience, it's something that Tim Wu, who's a really good writer on this whole subject, noted in an op-ed a couple years ago, and I quote it in the book because it was so important. The op-ed was called, I think, "The Tyranny of Convenience," and Tim writes about the fact that the way that the vicious cycle of this kind of convenience thinking, where right now you make the one-click buy purchase of whatever it might be, let's say a piece of hardware, because the hardware store is 5 miles away or 5 blocks away, and it's more convenient to buy it online, and instead of supporting that local business. Well, when that local business goes out of business, because you and others have stopped shopping there, the next time you have that decision to make, it's going to be even more convenient to buy online, because the closest hardware store will now be 10 miles away or 20 miles away or 10 or 20 blocks away. And so ultimately, yes, it is always going to be more convenient to buy online, and it'll continue to get more convenient to do that as all your other options wither away and fall away, and you're left in this complete void where this is all we're going to be left with. And so, yes, we have fallen victim to this mindset. Amazon, encouraged that mindset so deftly with their introduction of course, of the Prime program, which was so hugely successful because they sort of realized, made this the intuition that the insight that once a consumer paid what was originally $80 a year, now $120 a year or so for that Prime. I don't know because I don't belong in the exact sum, but it's around that in that ballpark. And once you've made that purchase, that investment, you feel like you want to get the full benefit of it. So you're going to keep buying everything from Amazon because you're somehow trying to get that money back, that investment back. And so that's sort of what the kind of consumer mindset that's driven that kind of boom. And then on top of that, last year with the pandemic, what happened last year was just extraordinary. I mean, I don't think a lot of I think us don't even want to really talk about it because we're a little bit embarrassed about the extent to which. No, I'm serious. I mean, I think that there's a bit of, I think, societal abashment about the extent to which we as society just went all in on the one-click life, even arguably, out of proportion even with the sort of public health demands of the moment. A lot of people just suddenly felt like they had people who might have felt some compunction about or guilt about buying on Amazon, or other forms of the one-click life. Now felt not only they could do it without guilt, but not just that, but that they could also actually kind of do it with a sense of virtue. Really, the cardboard box arriving on your stoop or your front porch or at your door was a sign that you were playing it safe. You were bending the curve. You were flattening the curve.
I got it.
And yeah, absolutely.
I wear a mask if I go in a store, but basically I try not to go in a store.
Right. Exactly. And what that overlooked, of course, was that there was an entire chain of people that were still out there. All these essential workers who were doing your bidding, just responding to your every whim and need on your one click, and under extraordinary pressure, more pressure than ever in the warehouses and in the trucks to get you what you were demanding in these massive quantities. And but that's what happened last year. I mean, the sales, Amazon sales shooting up 40%, hiring 400,000 more people, expanding their warehouse space by 50%. All that was us. We were the ones doing that.
That's right.
And it was all sort of under this sort of notion of it being this sort of public health safe thing to do. When in fact, I think we have to be honest about the fact that for a lot of us, it was that to some degree, but it was also the fact that that we discovered that incredible co-convenience and that incredible ease, and had a kind of cover for it. And it'll be very interesting to see whether now that the risk recedes, whether we are going to be willing to somewhat return to the physical world around us, get out of that hunker down moment, and actually return to the physical spaces, the communities around us, and just kind of re-engage with places we live in.
Right, with the hardware store 5 blocks away, and the people who work there and stock it and so on. No, it's very powerful what you say, and it began from a little bit of necessity and a little bit of virtue, but it's habit forming. Is when I talk to people about it. As I said, I you said you don't even belong to Prime. Our household does. I will say that. But, someone said, someone did a blog post in which they said, have you fallen into this? And I have, and I looked back and I had 6 purchases, and 2 of them were things I couldn't find anywhere else, So I felt like that's rational. That's, but I think it does become habit forming, the immediacy of that thing showing up later that afternoon or the next day. Without you having to do anything but lift a finger. By the way, and we don't have to talk about this, but when I talk about dying of convenience, I'm also talking about plastics, and all of, it's the number of ills of society that I think we accept or we generate to get a little bit more convenience is later. I think when we do the post-mortem, we'll see it wasn't just hurting our communities. It might be what kills the planet too. How did you choose the title, Fulfillment? I love the double meaning, but how did you choose it?
I chose it for the double meaning. I mean, in a way, I was so set on that title from a very early point that I almost chose the Amazon frame partly because I so love the title for it. Really, I just that double meaning of the Amazon's own term for their warehouses, for the work that's done in the warehouse. They often actually have the F word is often slapped on the side of the warehouses. It'll say Amazon fulfillment, and so you have that meaning, that sort of trade meaning. And then of course the larger meaning of just us as consumers trying to seek our own fulfillment through buying all this stuff and getting it so fast, getting that instant gratification so fast, and then also just our broader efforts as workers and as citizens to find meaning and fulfillment, and just how much more difficult it has become now.
That's right. The pluses over on this side, but in the fulfillment grading, some big losses. Can you talk just a little bit about the union vote in Bessemer, Alabama? Why it was why it lost, and what you think follows it.
So the election was announced actually just as I was putting the book to bed. Just after I put it to bed, they announced the election. It was an extraordinary development to have the first time ever a full warehouse election at an Amazon warehouse. It never happened before, and to have it happening in Alabama of all places made it all the more striking. And so I was following it very closely. I was all along in those months of as we were building up to the vote late last year, early this year, I was hearing from a lot of folks in the labor world about just how pessimistic they were about them actually managing to pull this off. There was a lot of excited coverage around it, of course, because it was such a novel thing to actually have an election like this. But the odds were always stacked against them, and they were stacked against them, I would say, for 2 general reasons. One, just that the labor laws in our country make it so difficult to organize. It's one reason why we are down to 6% now, 6% levels of unionization in private sector companies in America. And basically, it's going all the way back to the Taft-Hartley law passed in the early 50s, passed as in reaction against the successful organizing of the 30s and 40s. It's just gotten the playing field is so slanted against unions trying to organize. Most obviously in just the fact that employers are able to have such more access to workers in these kind of captive audience meetings that they can endlessly hold at the workplace and fill workers with all sorts of anti-union propaganda. And then while the unions have a much harder time of getting their message across to workers and accessing the workers. This was an especially big problem this year because the pandemic and the organizers in Alabama made the fateful and I would suggest probably questionable decision not to even pay home visits to workers to try to reach them away from the warehouse to make that a case. And so you have these laws that are so slanted against organizers, and then you have, and then on top of that, you have the broader problem of what I would just generally call sort of the low expectations of workers today, where you have workers who have such low sort of hopes for and expectations as they go to work at a place like Amazon. They're just a job they're doing for now. They have no intention of staying there very long. They won't stay there very long. The turnover of these warehouses is typically about a year. Such heavy turnover. You're coming and going. You're just there. You need a job for this moment. You're not going to last long. You're going to get worn out by the incredibly taxing nature of the work and isolating nature of it. And you may not even know anyone who's in a union anymore. Your mom or dad probably weren't in a union. So the whole sort of notion of what a union can bring in terms of not just higher pay, but more say in the job, more voice in the job, a more sort of sustainable kind of just sense of purpose and stature on the job, all that just doesn't mean anything to you because it's not even really sort of part of your environment anymore. And so that also makes it really tough to organize, and you end up with results like we saw there, where the company wins quite handily. That said, I mean, I don't think that it's not a lost cause. These fights are going to go on. There's a case to be made that this particular fight probably did help to spread more activism and ferment around at other warehouses around the country, and certainly brought more scrutiny to the company and the conditions in the warehouses. And it's going to be a long battle. We have to keep in mind that it took decades to organize a lot of the factories and mills in the early part of the 20th century, and these things they do take time, and we should also keep in mind that the fight matters so much. The stakes are so high that these warehouses really are becoming kind of the locus of mass employment, working class employment in our country today. Where you used to, if you needed a job years ago and you didn't have a college degree, didn't have specialized training, you would go down to the factory, or you might go to the shopping mall or down to the steel mill. And now increasingly you just go to the warehouse, and that they are now the second largest employer in the country after Walmart. And they're growing so rapidly. And so what the work looks like at these warehouses is more and more going to kind of define what general working class employment looks like in America. So it matters so much what comes of these battles.
Okay, let me tell people that we're about the halfway point here. This is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with ALEC MacGILLIS, who writes for ProPublica. We're talking about his latest book, Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America, which is about Amazon, but really it's about the results of Amazon, the ripples, the consequences, the side effects of Amazon and the whole method of online purchasing and immediate delivery. To learn more, you can follow him on Twitter at ALEC MacGILLIS, ALEC Please share this podcast widely. Let's talk a little bit more about the warehouse. You point out that a lot of us hoped that as things got more automated in warehouses, the workers who remained would have a little better they'd be sort of the minds running the machines. That's not really what's happened, is it?
It's not. You'd like to think that's the whole promise of automation, that it frees us for sort of higher order things, and that's not what's happening in the warehouses. In the warehouses, the work itself has got, as they've brought in more robots, the work has gotten more robotic.
Mm-hmm.
The clearest example of that is what's happened with the kind of iconic job of the picker. These are the people who used to roam all the corridors of all these shelves and shelves of goods, looking for whatever was being requested by us, the consumer, and they would hunt around for it and then bring it back, and it would go on its way. Now, and that would of course involve a whole lot of walking, miles and miles of walking. But there's a little bit of sort of hunt and search autonomy that kind of came with it for that worker. Now the picker is in most of the warehouses standing in a fixed location all day, hours and hours, waiting for robots to bring them the items. Basically, you have these robots. They look like little, kind of like little ottomans, and they have stacks of shelves on top of them, and they zoom all around. Don't somehow manage not to crash into each other, and then bring the stacks of shelves to the worker when one of the items in the shelves has been requested. And the worker stands there and pulls things out of the shelves one after another. And in a way, the worker is being driven. Their pace is being driven by the robot, and the robot
Mm-hmm.
becomes the taskmaster. When the robot comes to you, you got to take the thing out, and there's the next robot's right behind him with another thing. And there's just, so you're really kind of, your rate is being pushed by the robot. And this happens in similar ways elsewhere around the warehouse as things get more automated.
Yeah, in other words, instead of you running the robot begins to run you.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other thing that goes along with that is the productivity goals or productivity quotas and things, right? I'm going to just note an article that just came out a week ago, which in the Washington Post analysis of Occupational Safety and Health Administration data shows Amazon's serious injury rates are nearly double those at warehouses run by other companies. And the notion is the productivity pressure. Can you talk a bit about that?
Right. Yes, I mean, Amazon has just developed a whole different level of kind of a form of warehouse work than what we've known before. The experts kind of call it random chaos. The way usual warehouse works is that everything is in a given location within the warehouse. It's organized in some way that, in a fixed kind of way, and the worker knows that, this kind of beer is over here, this kind of beer is over there, and they go off looking for things when they're ordered. And in Amazon, it's all being driven by the computers, by these AI systems where things are just are stashed away in completely random places, wherever there's a space available on a shelf or a drawer, and then everything is then is the computer then essentially brings things forward when they're ordered, and so everything is it's super hyper efficient in a way that we have not seen before with warehouses. For workers, this means that there's just vastly higher productivity pressures, and everything is vastly more automated, and you're constantly being just driven by not just a supervisor kind of keeping an eye on you and making sure you're not slacking off, but you're constantly tracked by the data, by the algorithms, but they know, the system knows at all times just how quote on task you are, and whether you're keeping up to your rate, whether you're picking or packing or stowing or bringing in pallets on a forklift. You're constantly being tracked, and so as soon as you start to slip a little bit below the expected rate, someone's going to be coming over to you to have a talk with you, and so it does lead to higher rates of injuries and repetitive motion injuries, all sorts of some of them minor injuries, but some going all the way up to fatal ones. I described 2 different fatalities at a single warehouse in Pennsylvania in the book, and then even some sort of darkly comic moments, such as the time in a warehouse in Ohio. I found this deep in some OSHA workplace safety records, where at one warehouse in Ohio, the company was putting legally blind people behind the wheels of a forklift, with the inevitable result of of an accident. So, and I should say the company rationalizes away their high rates of injuries by saying that, in fact, that it's unfair to suggest that they are more dangerous. It's simply that they claim simply that they're better about reporting these injuries than other warehouses. So
our data is better, so that's what.
Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, you point out that even warehouse employees have to sign non-disclosure agreements.
Exactly. I encountered this when I actually applied for a job there myself. Thought I'd take a job for a while just to make sure I got things right about how things were working inside the warehouse. And I got the job. I was offered, passed the drug test and all that. But before I could even click to accept the job and get my start date, I had to click through an incredibly broad NDA, non-disclosure agreement, promising not to ever tell anyone anything whatsoever about anything on the job. And,
wow.
So even the lowliest warehouse worker, $13 an hour, was being expected to make that kind of a pledge.
Yeah, and you the chapters in this book and the way the book is sort of laid out is often you will focus on a city, because remember at the top we talked about the germ of this book, the origin of this book is in what's happened, the contrast of what's happened to cities in America. And then within each city, you'll focus on individual human beings, which is the way I love my analysis and my data and things to be revealed, which is through human stories. But in the very introduction, I'm just going to read a quote here. You write about a fellow named Hector, and you can tell us more about Hector, but I'm just going to read this quote. It was 9 months into Hector's time at the company, yet he was the only one who remained from his orientation class of 20. The others either hadn't been able to handle the pace, or had gotten injured, or been terminated because they'd run out of excused absences after getting injured. So tell us Hector's story.
Sure. I actually found out about Hector through ProPublica. His wife was very worried about what was happening in the warehouses early in the pandemic, that she reached out to us at ProPublica and described the situation where you had workers so scared about getting the virus, and also just working under even under higher pressure than usual to handle this massive surge in orders. The company not telling them enough about who was getting the virus. They just you find out that someone had gotten sick just because they would suddenly vanish, and the company, at least at the outset, not doing enough to reduce the risk of people catching it from each other. And so Hector, her husband, was so worried about catching it and so worried about passing it on to his mother-in-law, who was living with him, elderly mother-in-law, that he moved himself into the basement of their home in suburban Denver and for months just lived down there in this barely furnished basement, completely separated from his family for months, because he was so scared that he would bring the virus home and get them sick. So he was very representative of that kind of fear that people were dealing with in the warehouses while we were all safely at home. And then he was also representative in the sense that he was one of these people who had come to the warehouse to work a year earlier, after his previous whole career had just kind of fallen apart. He had worked in the tech industry making a lot of money, but had lost that job in the Great Recession, had spent years unemployed, sort of sliding into depression, until his wife finally really kind of ordered him to go back and get a job, took a job at the warehouse, and was, in fact, the only member of his class of 20 new employees that arrived in the summer of 19 to still be working there a year later. That is how transient this universe is, that you would have just an entire more than a dozen people just come and go like that, and he was the only one left, and I believe he's actually still working there today. He's become, by Amazon standards, a lifer. And the last I spoke with him some months ago, he was still living in the basement.
Oh, my God. Okay. Let's move now, ALEC MacGILLIS, to as I said, one of the ways you set up the book is a chapter about a city, contrasting cities and so on. And obviously, if there's a poetry to contrasting D.C. with Baltimore, but I think D.C. is somewhat sui generis because of the government. So would you kind of compare Baltimore to Seattle? What happened to both of those cities as this way of doing business and this way of life has taken over?
Sure. I mean, what Seattle shows is how the tech economy works now in regional terms. The way that it has this, there's a clustering kind of winner take all effect now to our economic geography, where back in the days of the manufacturing economy, once there was some new innovation in manufacturing, like say the steel making process that was invented by Henry Bessemer, English inventor, you could take that innovation and sort of build a mill anywhere in the country where you had basic manpower and natural resources and river and rail to get your product to market. So you ended up with steel mills in Baltimore and in Gary, Indiana, and Weirton, West Virginia, and Chicago, and all over the place. But with the tech economy, it works differently. The whole value lies in the initial innovation, in the software or the app or the program or whatever it is that has been that these people typically working in close proximity with each other and also in proximity with venture capital have managed to come up with. That's the whole value, is in that discovery, that the production that flows from that is sort of immaterial. So it's all about getting people together, getting that human capital together for the innovation. And so you want to have proximity. And so you end up with something like a Silicon Valley where there's just this huge kind of demand to have people, to have the engineers and the programmers in contact with each other, and also in contact with of course the venture capital that's going to seed their startup. And so with Seattle, you have the situation where once Microsoft set up shop there, and they went there because it was kind of a hometown thing. They were both, Bill Gates and Paul Allen were both from Seattle, and so after starting Microsoft in Albuquerque, they kind of got homesick and decided to go back to Seattle. Microsoft grows quickly, and then by the time Jeff Bezos comes around in the early 90s with his idea for an online bookstore, he needs somewhere to set up shop, and he chooses Seattle for two reasons. He has no personal connection to Seattle, but he chooses it for two reasons. One, there's a tax advantage to him to being in a small state, not being in California, not being in Silicon Valley, because he has selling online. He's going to have a tax advantage against physical bookstores because he's not going to have to assess sales taxes on customers if he's selling to people in places where his company does not have a physical presence. So he didn't want to be in California because if he was in California, he'd have to assess sales taxes on the biggest market in the country. So better to go to a small state. So he goes to Seattle for that reason, but also because Microsoft is already there. Mm-hmm. And so there's that skilled workforce of computers and engineers that he knew he could draw on for his own company. And so you end up with that kind of clustering effect. It's an agglomeration effect is the fancy word the economists use for it. And it grows and grows on itself. Even as these cities become more expensive and congested, there's this feeling that as a tech company that you need to be there to draw on that workforce. And this would not be such a huge problem for us in terms of sort of regional terms if we had not allowed these companies to get so enormous. It wouldn't be such a big deal where one tech company like Amazon decides to go, if Amazon then didn't proceed to become this utter Goliath. And but it's because it's the combination of that kind of agglomerating effect of the tech economy, and with the fact that we've let the companies to grow so large and dominant, that has kind of trebled the effect of this winner take all effect. So then you have the situation more recently of Amazon deciding where to put its second headquarters, and it chooses Washington D.C. both because it wants to be at the seat of the federal government and exert sway on any kind of possible interventions against its dominance, but also because Washington D.C. itself has a very large, skilled, highly educated tech workforce, and so Amazon wants to go there, even though Washington is the wealthiest city in the country, very expensive, very congested part of the country. You would seem like you wouldn't want to have to squeeze 25,000 more high-paid workers in there, but they're going to do it because, again, it's that winner-take-all effect where you want to be where the winners already are, and so you end up with DC and Seattle just this real kind of rich get rich winner take all effect, whereas the Baltimores, the Daytons, all these other cities that used to fare perfectly well in the manufacturing economy when things were just more dispersed, now find themselves completely left behind and essentially becoming warehouse towns. Baltimore in the Amazon sort of landscape is now a warehouse town with four warehouses in just outside the city. 3 of them at the former steel mill, 1 of them at the former GM plant, with workers making far less than their counterparts used to at those very same locations.
And as I mentioned before, you tell this story through the stories of cities and through the stories of individuals. So there are the individuals whose lives we follow in Baltimore, who used to work at the steel plant, whose parents worked at the steel plant, and who now end up doing warehouse work for much less money, and as we see, no less physical danger.
Right. I would correct cautions to some degree there. Certainly less physical danger than the steel mill. The steel mill was extraordinarily dangerous, but definitely barely less physically taxing.
Okay.
And yes, and very much more isolating. Very much more a daily work existence that's much more atomized, lonely, much less camaraderie, and much less sense of purpose. So you instead of making steel that's going to our bridges and our skyscrapers and our tunnels, all you're doing is just packing. Let's face it, you're packing crap that was made halfway around the world, and is likely headed to a landfill in a year or two.
Yeah, and you point out the loss of community in a couple of ways. One, you say that people who worked in a steel mill or a car factory and these sorts of things, and they also usually belong to a union. There was if you will, a brotherhood. There was a community. After work they got together. They played poker together. They drank beer together. You say that from these numbing jobs here, people can't wait to get home. The second thing you point out is the incredible deals that Amazon makes with cities, thus sapping communities' tax bases.
Exactly. There's one of the big parts of the book is these incredible negotiations that I was able to find through getting emails back and forth between local officials, city and county officials, state officials, and the company, where the company is just, as a matter of fact, always seeking huge tax subsidies to go in exchange for deigning to build a warehouse or a data center in one of these communities, and in one town or city or state after another, just forking over not only the big subsidies, but also then agreeing to the company's demand for secrecy and lack of transparency around these arrangements.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. There's a lot more. In other words, we didn't even go into third-party sellers. We didn't go into how much of what they're doing is counterfeit, how much of what is moving off the shelves is counterfeit. We didn't go into the destruction of small-town America. We don't have time. But the book is rich with, as I say, rich with stories. You get the data, you get the analysis, you get the big picture, but you get it through individual stories. You're applying this bigger picture systems perspective to this phenomenon of One-Click America. Everything's connected. When you look forward, how do we unravel and repair some of the threads of society that one click is distorting, damaging, disabling? What do we do?
I would say it's kind of on two different levels. At the systemic level, it really comes down to taking action in Washington. There is a lot of ferment now around trying to take on some of these giants. The book does not have a solutions chapter. It's not an argument book, but I think it does leave one with the implicit sense that one way to deal with these incredibly unhealthy concentrations, regional concentrations of wealth, is to take on the concentration of our economy in a small handful of companies, and that those two things are closely linked. That corporate concentration is linked to regional concentration, and so it'll be very interesting to see whether, in fact, that some of these proposals in Washington to break up or somehow rein in the tech giants, either through legislation or regulatory action, come to fruition. So that's the one front, and then I think the other front is more of a more societal and more on us as citizens and consumers to recognize what is happening, to recognize these inequalities and how our own sort of daily habits are playing into them, and to try to correct for that. I've not been advocating some kind of boycott or cold turkey, anything like that. But I do think that it's incumbent on all of us to sort of take stock of where we are now, especially after this pandemic year, when we went so kind of whole hog into the one-click kind of lifestyle, and to get out of that hunker down mode, to get out of the home, to reconnect with the places around us, not just in terms of where we're buying our stuff, but also just more generally to get back out to the movies and the theater and everything that is available to us in the physical spaces in which we live. Because if we just stay hunkered down, stay just glued to the screen, to the one click, it's all going to wither, and we're going to be left with only that one option.
Right. And democracy itself, I think, for all the other assaults that are going on with voter suppression and that sort of thing, the loss of the conversation that you will have at a local store, at a local library, in your community, those conversations are one of the foundations of a democracy being able to function.
Absolutely. We have almost no more, so few interactions anymore, even sort of between classes. At the store, you might at least have that one exchange with the guy who's helping you find something, or
Yep.
the lady at the cash register, and there's at least some kind of interaction, some kind of human contact. And now you make that one-click order, and you're probably not even going to look up from your computer as the guy shows up in his blue and black jersey and drops it off.
Right. So again, the new book is Fulfillment, Winning and Losing in One-Click America. To learn more, you can follow ALEC MacGILLIS on Twitter at ALEC MacGILLIS, ALEC MacGillis. I recommend this book. It's about very important consequences of what we have slid into or adopted as a way of filling our needs in a busy world. But it's also about towns and cities and individuals and so on. ALEC is an investigative reporter, but also a storyteller. For this conversation and many others, interviews, articles, to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerrenceMcNally.net. That's TerrenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. All one word. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly announcement that tells you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and usually 8 or 10 articles to flesh out the conversation, you can email me at temcnally, TEMCNALLY, temcnally@mac.com, or you can sign up at my website. And you'll find years of podcasts at my site, or at Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and really most major podcast sites. Listen anytime, anywhere. Thanks to George Vasilopoulos of Progressive Voices. You can follow me on Twitter at McNallyTerrence. And most of all, I thank you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely. And ALEC MacGILLIS, thank you, and keep up your good work.
Thanks so much, Karen.